for a discussion. Good afternoon. Great to have you on the show.
Yes.
Great to have you.
Good afternoon. I can hear you.
Okay. Well, it's been 22 years of uninterrupted democracy and 28 years after the annulment of the June 12 election. Would you say the ideals of June 12 have come to fruition? Have we imbibed them in our democracy?
Well, you know, I'm beginning to believe that many different people have very different definitions of democracy, especially democracy in action. And that applies particularly to leadership. In recent times, I begin to wonder whether this government, led by Buhari, really understand the implications, the full responsibilities and commitment involved when people say that they are practicing a democratic regimen. One has become alarmed at, and not for the first time, by the way, not for the first time, about the understanding of democracy as emanating from the top hierarchy of governance.
Okay, let's speak to a recent event, Professor. You categorized the government's behavior in banning or suspending Twitter. You said the government was acting petulantly. A week on, what do you think was achieved by that suspension?
Yeah, this is one indication, one indicative of what I'm saying exactly. In aborting or in truncating the various channels of self-expression open to any populace, right? any kind of polity, you are absolutely abrogating the very essence of democracy. Democracy is not a sequence or series of spasms of symbolic gestures, such as restoring June 12th as the Democracy Day. That's purely symbolic. It's an act of restitution. In fact, I read comments about this, and people saying, "Oh, it was all a deceit. It was all a deceit." How can there be a deceit when it was never a reality? No, that restoration was obviously a symbolic gesture, which was very calculating, by the way, very calculating. But it has to be manifested consistently and without exception in the act. And when you truncate any channel of self-expression of a people, you are literally becoming an enemy of democracy. It's so obvious. I mean, it's so plain. I just don't understand why one even has to expatiate on it.
We do apologize for the poor audio you're having to deal with, Professor Wole Soyinka, but I want to stay on Twitter. When you look at the government's argument that the platform gives different rules to different people, they give example of the IPOB leader, Nnamdi Kanu. They say the platform has allowed him to be more bigoted, more incendiary comments are coming from him than have ever been tweeted by the Nigerian president. So do they have a point when they say that? Different rules for different people.
Yes. When I say that it's evident that democracy means different things to different people, it's a statement criticizing the latest acts of this government, especially in relation to freedom of expression and even more important, freedom of association. The language, for instance, which Buhari used in his interview recently and even in his statements from Aso Rock, when in relation to those who are clamoring for this or clamoring for that, especially the quote-unquote so-called secession advocates and so on, there is a statement like we're seceding or we're no longer part of this is an act of criticism, is a critical critical statement of the situation as is. And any sensitive leadership must learn to understand this and respond to the reasons behind those agitations. Not say that, not start threatening and bullying and trying to intimidate people, because they are giving vent to very deep-seated grievances. I mean, I watched, let me just diverge a little bit. Again, stop me if I go off the intended question because I only partially heard it. For instance, there was a question. I watched this interview with Buhari on this very channel, and there was a question about a question which involved the statement, the position of the various governors on open grazing. Yeah, here it's at least 50% of a nation, at least their representatives saying that within the Constitution, within this democratic dispensation that we say we're operating, we're saying on behalf of our people, we do not want open grazing anymore. And then somebody sits in Aso Rock and says to them, oh, well, there's a kind of constitution. I'm instructing my Attorney General to dig up some kind of law, colonial law, which arbitrated between farmers and herders. And says, so I'm instructing him to dust up those old mangy documents, and so that I can recover on behalf of a certain private business. I can recover the old roots, which means that he's not listening. He's not listening to what the people are saying. He's not listening to what the governors representing them are saying. He's saying, I am going to restore those roots by referring to some colonial arrangement. Now, when I listen to a thing like that, I really despair. It was a very instructive, I want to say this, it's the most instructive interview. I mean, not that there was anything new in it. One was just hoping that this government had transcended that kind of partisan thinking. It was very instructive. I was a leader who, incidentally, I must congratulate him on one thing. He seemed to have recovered his verve. He was energetic. He was quite articulate. He seemed to think about what he was saying. It's a very different kind of Buhari, but it's also a rather, disturbing kind of Buhari, because this was the language of a leader who felt he was on a roll, while the nation is on a roller coaster. And that's even putting it mildly. In fact, the nation is on a nosedive. And there he is, feeling that he's on top of events, and everybody from all quarters, traditional rulers, north, south, east, west, the ordinary people in the street, the professionals, the intellectuals, name it, the foreign governments, statements by foreign society. I'm not talking about Western government or Eastern government. I'm just talking about even some of our African governments are saying this nation is on a nosedive. And there he is, as if he's just woken up to a situation where he last took off to nowhere mentally, And that is why the leader is able to say, I'm ignoring, I haven't heard what everybody is saying, and I am going to reinstate the old rules through one means, the old cattle routes through one means or the other. That's not, it means he's not listening. And if a leader doesn't listen, he's not engaging in the democratic imperative. Okay. And that is where the danger is.
Professor, he's not listening. How do we make him or the government listen? How do we speak to them in a language they will understand?
Well, that's a very good question, because it relates to what I was saying earlier. It's because he's not listening, or he's listening and he's not understanding, that you then have these extreme movements who are saying, wait a minute, there's nobody up there. We better look after our own security. We better look after our own very existence. And there are movements. For instance, I was invited to a conference in Abuja recently. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend, but I sent a paper to a memo to General Olusegun Obasanjo saying, well, consider this. If you think it's any use, discuss it, take what you need out of it. If you think it's useless, throw it away. But I cooperated with this endeavor, even if I couldn't be there, because this is one of those channels to which people resort, having despaired of the regular structural channels between the leadership and the led. And so you have these various meetings. I think at this meeting of Obasanjo's initiative, you had former head of state, Abdusalami, you had Sultan of Sokoto, you had the head of the Christian people, you had representative of this and that and so on. And there are all these well-intentioned endeavors, initiatives going on all around. But I think Buhari is still asleep where, he last fell asleep, and that's a few years ago. And this nation has changed dramatically over the last few years. So we need a totally different kind of verve, a different kind of appreciation, and a different level of understanding of what Nigerian people are like and what they will settle for and what they will not accept. And so, just go back to what I said at the beginning. On this so-called Democracy Day, we're embarked in a plane on a nosedive. And Buhari had better listen to all these various initiatives which are taking place around him. Ultimately, the buck stops at his desk. He takes his decision, but at least let's have a sense that in that place called Aso Rock, whoever is in charge is listening, ingesting, digesting, analyzing, and recognizing the fact that the tempo of disintegration of this nation has accelerated in the last couple of years beyond anything we've ever known since the Civil War.
Professor Soyinka, you paint such a troubling picture. But let's talk about the role of the people in forging democratic governance and demanding accountability. Would you say the Nigerian people have been too docile for too long, or are they just too complacent?
Well, I heard what you said about the people in government around him. The people immediately around him, let me tell you, it's about time he sacked most of them anyway. They're not doing him or the nation any service. They're distorting. I think they're just lickspittles who say to him what they think he wants to hear. So if he's depending on them, his government is doomed, and so is this nation, unfortunately. There's nothing wrong with the government being doomed. People know how to find themselves. But unfortunately, the nature, the causes of disintegration, of destabilization of everything we've ever known, everything we've ever built up, is going to redound most negatively on the nation. And during this so-called Democracy Day, it's time for some drastic rethinking on the part of this government.
Professor Soyinka, I was asking about the role of the Nigerian people in the democratic process. How would you describe their role so far?
How do I define it? All right. Let's go back to, let's go to a statement recently made by one of the governors. I think it was the Oyo State governor. And it had to do with the recent attack, this just butchery which took place in Oyo State, which is one of those defining moments. It's not the first, I'm just saying the most recent defining moment for the future of this nation. And he was saying, I cannot defend my own people, but we've set up the structures of defense, but we lack the equipment. We lack the equipment. And he's speaking, not for himself, he's repeating what everybody has been saying. We lack the equipment, we're ready to order it, we're ready to pay for it, we're waiting for the authorization from Aso Rock, from Buhari. I expected a leader to leap into the fray and say immediately, what authorization are you waiting for? Your people are being killed, you need this, I'm going to facilitate it. Come and see me in Aso Rock, if the authorities still rest with it. Because this governor is articulating the misery, the despair, the desperation of his own people, who say we're being butchered every day, serially, in morsels, collectively, and we need this to be able to protect ourselves and therefore continue to be part of this nation. Well, are you surprised then that the people then get up? Where did Sunday Igboho come from? What brings up individuals in desperate straits like Igboho? It's when they feel that they're not being listened to, and that their very existence is in jeopardy. It's in fact in great question. So when you ask me what do the people feel, you hear it everywhere. You see it, you hear it in all those rallies saying we've had enough, we're going Oduduwa way, we're going Biafra way, we're going... If the Benue people, for instance, felt that they had the logistics and that they were positioned to even talk about the secession, they would have been the first talking secession, considering what's been happening to them in Benue over the past few years, to which nobody seems to be able to find a solution. So you shouldn't be asking me what people are saying. It's out there on the streets. It's in the open, every day. Go to the Western Corridor of Nigeria, Lagos, Ogun State, Oyo, just go up there towards Kwara. Go to that Western Corridor and see what's happening there. And so don't ask me what people are saying, it's obvious. Why was Amotekun created? It is an act of desperation, of frustration, because those who are actually in charge, I mean, everyday kidnapping, it's become a business. And then somebody comes on air and acts as if all is well, as if, very blithely, as if we're in a very simple, just a minor hiccup somewhere or the other. I'm saying this whole nation is about to self-destruct. And I'm not the only one saying it. And it's time Buhari and his government listen and take action. Otherwise, we will not be celebrating another Democracy Day come next year.
Okay, Professor, my colleague was actually asking what people should be doing, but let's dream a little. What would you like to see? What people should be doing?
All they can in their capacity. They're mobilizing, they're crying out aloud, they're creating self-defense forces, they're marching through the streets, demanding extreme action. What more should they be doing? I don't understand that question.
Let me move. Let's.
You see it in the street. What they're doing.
Let's look ahead, though. Let's dream a little. Come 2023, what would you like to see in Nigeria as a way out, as a way forward?
All right. First of all, Buhari must address the nation, and I don't mean the kind of interview he did the other day, which was, I think, to tell the Nigerians that he was hale and hearty, that he must address the decision and say, at least using his own words, I use my own word, that we're in a state of war, and that we must be prepared for the worst, but at the same time, that the government is in full solidarity behind the people, that sacrifices will be made here and there, maybe tightening of belts here, even go as far as saying that some of our present lifestyle, things which we take for granted, we may for a time have to do without them simply because we have an internal enemy force which is eating into the intestines of the nation. I mean, in other words, first of all, begin by talking to people like a leader, and a leader who's awake to the realities of the situations. Then let us see actions actually being taken. I'm tired of hearing, for instance, that, oh, don't worry, you'll see differences in a few weeks' time. You'll see a difference in a short while. You see, no, I think we're a bit tired of that. He's got to put his cards on the table. He's got to take people into confidence. He's got to stop exuding a false confidence, because that kind of confidence is totally false. It's not based on realities. And we've got to see an acceleration of actions to retrieve this nation from the very edge. It's no longer the problem of the people, it's the problem of leadership, because the people have shown themselves ready to act to save their own communities.
Well, I'm glad you cleared that, because the president in one of his recent engagements say Nigerians forget too easily by allowing and enabling corrupt politicians back into power. But let me ask you about the calls for cessations and the agitation. You recently dissociated yourself from the call for a Yoruba nation. How do you think that this calls for cessation have been handled so far by the federal and state governments? And do you totally, disagree with the calls?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the politicians, and we have to be brief because I really must dash. You mentioned the politicians. I think the politicians are not doing enough. NAS, Senate, if they study the Constitution very carefully, they find that they have certain powers which they haven't touched. And I've discussed this with lawyers, by the way, constitutional lawyers. They have certain powers, there are certain areas in which they can act, they can force this government, they can compel this government to act the way it should. And that applies especially to governors. The governors themselves, they're too tentative. I've used that expression before. They're too timid. There are certain areas in the Constitution in which, to go back to my favorite expression, they can push the envelope completely so that we get a sense of governance at all tiers, not just at the top, not just at the grassroots, but at all tiers, and a synergy going on between them. I think the people are ready to move, to stand behind their own leaders. I forget the rest of the question, but I'm very glad that you raised the issue of the politicians. I think
the second part of the question was to call for agitations. The Yoruba Nation, you had to recently issue a statement calling them contemptible interloper, those who associated with the calls for a Yoruba Nation. Do you disagree with the calls for a Yoruba Nation, and how do you think these several agitations have been handled so far?
Yoruba Nation, when it's time, I will make, whether Yoruba Nation or Biafra Nation or Shekiri or whatever it is, all this kind of disintegrative motions. When it's time, I'll make a statement on that, and I respond to it only because I want to use your channel to appeal to people to stop putting words in my mouth. Such people are stupid; they are morons. If you think that you can pressure me to speak by stealing my identity and putting words in my mouth on social media and so on, you're wasting your time. Not only that, you're just acting in a very destructive way because you deceive people, people misunderstand the position one takes, and they become confused. And so give up this game, this very stupid, childish, and moronic game of putting words in Wole Soyinka's mouth and putting them on social media. You're criminals when you do that. You're also traitors to the common cause. And so let's respect one another's position. I don't put words in people's mouth, whoever they are. I don't lie against people. And in this very sensitive period, I must warn Nigerians just to stop playing around with such serious issues. Otherwise, they're going to lose even the kind of support they have from people like me. And so my answer to your question, I'm sorry, but I'm using my opportunity now to address the Nigerian people themselves. My opportunity is this, my position is this. If I'm heading a section, a community of a totality, and I say I'm in desperate straits, I need this, and I'm entitled. I'm not asking for what I'm not entitled to. I'm asking for what is my entitlement as the leader of a community in this nation. I don't care who says that, northwest, east, or south. When leaders, sectional leaders, are placed in a position where they cannot answer the people's existential yearning, don't be surprised if they start saying, we want Tiv Nation, we want Kanuri Nation, we want Biafra Nation, we want Yoruba Nation. Don't be surprised to hear it. It's simply because they feel they're not being taken seriously anymore.
Okay, Professor, I'm told we're running out of time, so very briefly, do you believe Nigeria can remain as one?
Do I think that Nigeria can continue as one?
Yes.
Not if it continues this way. Not if it fails to decentralize. Some people use the word reconstruction, some people use the word whatever, but if Nigeria fails to decentralize And I mean to decentralize as fast as possible, manifestly, not as rhetoric. Then Nigeria cannot stay together. Again, it's not Wole Soyinka saying this. Everybody said it. Generals have said, ex-generals, ex-head of states have said it, politicians have said it, analysts have said it, economists have said it. And sometimes we get that, and that's what's happening to people in the streets. That's where they're moving. That's why they're demonstrating. That's why they're defying even threats from the police, from the government. If you demonstrate, you're traitors. If you do this, we'll deal with you. We'll talk to you in language which you understand. It doesn't wash with anybody any longer. Because if the nation is on a suicide slide, the people who feel that they do not deserve that kind of suicidal plunge, they have a right to say, sorry, I'm getting off this plane before it nosedives.
Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka, thank you so much for your time on Newsday. Much appreciated.